Welcome to the Boosted Volunteer Podcast. We share the stories of dedicated Booster Club volunteers and the tools and strategies they use to run successful booster clubs. We also have sought-out experts on fundraising, volunteer management, and running nonprofits to share best practices. Hosted by Robin Eisler and Evan Eisler, you won't want to miss these great episodes that will help you run your booster club like a champ.
Hi, I'm Robin Eisler with the Boosted Volunteer. Today, we're going to talk about recruiting volunteers. This is by far the most common pain problem that we hear from all of our booster clubs. And today, we wanted to take a special episode and just focus on this one issue and give you some feedback and some tips on how you can try to get more people involved in your booster club. You know, recruiting volunteers it's the point we hear most often, and it's always the same few people doing most of the work. And we see that across all of our booster clubs. And quite honestly, no matter how many volunteers that you do gather, typically it's going to follow the 80-20 rule, that 20% of the people are going to do 80% of the work. And we see that across most booster clubs. So I think when you're recruiting volunteers, one of the things that you want to do is to set your expectations for the number of volunteers or how much work they're going to do. And I think a great expectation is if you're doing some big events or running a concession stand or supporting a band on Friday nights or things like that, you know, your goal is to get volunteers to fill all those hourly slots. You're probably not going to get a whole lot of people that are going to go above and beyond and going to extend into the management of your booster club and that type of thing. But if you can just get people to fill those slots, that really takes a lot of burden off of the booster club board. So let's dive in. And why do we see this problem and how can we fix it? So I think the biggest reason we see this problem is people come into a booster club and they see, oh my gosh, we've got to run a concession stand, every other Friday night for 3 or 4 months. And that's going to take about 100 volunteer shifts. So let's just start asking for volunteers. And they go out and they start blasting messages everywhere. We need volunteers. Sign up, sign up, sign up. And that message is going to get you some volunteers. It's going to sign up a few people. But I think what happens is you miss the bigger picture when you go out and you just start asking people to volunteer. So I like to follow something I call iChat, or have recently coined the term iChat as a volunteer recruitment strategy. And so we start with step 1, which is the I, and that's the introduction. You would be surprised how many parents and families in your group, in your program, aren't even aware that the booster club exists or what it does. And in many cases, the booster club is, completely separate from the school, and you just show up and you make things happen. And so while you think that you're very visible and very present in the work and is present and you're asking for volunteers all the time, the average parent who's got a million things going on and a couple of kids in school and working and whatnot, they may not even see that interaction. So the first thing that I like to do is to introduce the booster club. What it does, who's involved, wear name tags, wear shirts that say Booster Club Volunteer at all of your events. And you'll typically have an opportunity to make this introduction at your early season events, such as your Meet the Team or tryouts or an all-parent meeting. And this is where you have to kind of battle from the coach or the director to get 5 or 10 minutes and say, hey, I just need to do an introduction of the Booster Club. I need to let people know that we're here and what we're doing. And, you can show it as a team. We've got 3 or 4 people and this is who we are. And here's what we're trying to achieve. Yes, we run a concession stand every other Friday night, but what most people don't recognize is that that's how we get 30% of our funds to do what we do here in the band. And so that gives you the opportunity to kind of explain the work that the Booster Club parents do. So we'll start with the introduction in the iChat. And then next, we're going to start with contact. So this is something that often gets so overlooked in booster clubs, and it's really critical. It's probably the most important thing you can do in your booster club is to build a database of contact information for your potential members, supporters, sponsors, volunteers, and that type of thing. This takes some work. So the first thing you're going to do is probably set up a registration form or get a list from your coach. or perhaps post a QR code to sign up at that introduction meeting. You may need to have an information table where you can sit and have people fill out a form. We recommend doing it digitally because it's hard to read people's writing. You may need to have an event such as a meet the parent night, or sometimes a happy hour works, or a breakfast, and say, hey, we're the boosters, come meet us. We're going to do our sign up night, or just have a sign up page on your website. The bottom line is you can't recruit people that you can't reach. And so you have to get their names and their contact information. And if you build this in and think of this as like a main step of your booster club, you're going to come out with better results at the end. Now in iChat, we're to the H, which I call the hype. And what happens is a lot of people get this backwards. They go out and ask for volunteers, and then they forget that why do we need the volunteers? What are we trying to achieve? We're trying to fill the concession stand slots. No, that's not what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to send our kids to Disney World this year on a trip with the band. We're trying to reach the football state finals with our football team and make an awesome experience for our football team. So this is where you have to get people emotionally invested in your mission. What are your students trying to achieve? What are they doing that's awesome? What big goals does your program have for the year? So this is where you want to take a moment, whether it's in an email or a newsletter or social media or on an app that you have available, and get people really excited about what you're trying to do this season. It doesn't have anything to do with filling those volunteer slots or donating money. It has to do with the outcome for the students. So you want to focus on that hype, and you may even want to send 2 or 3 hype messages to get people really fired up about what you're doing. Once you've done that introduction, you've found the contact information, and you've set the hype, the next thing you're going to do is the ask. And this is where you're going to actually make that ask for your volunteers. I think this is really a 3-step process. You're going to ask in 3 different ways. So the first ask should come from the coach or the band director or the program leader. When you have the lead person on the school side make the ask for volunteers, it just has more impact. And it's because people think it's expected or required. So I would love to lean on the goodwill of people here, but sometimes the director asking or the coach asking makes people go, oh, I better do this because coach asked. So if you can get your program leader to put out the ask to help volunteer or join the booster club, this really gives some authority over that and makes people think, this is an expectation that I'm going to volunteer for our booster club. You'll want to be careful in any language that your coach or your program director uses, because we don't like to use the word mandatory when talking about volunteering for a nonprofit. It gets into all kinds of crazy rules about nonprofit interactions. And then the next thing you're going to do, so your first ask is going to come from your authority figure, your coach, your program director, band director. The second ask can be the big mass one that you send out an email or on your app or on social media. Hey, we need volunteers for our concession stand. Here's where you can sign up. Make it easy for them to sign up, hopefully with a link or a tool where they can easily click and jump on and sign up. And then get that out multiple times. So 2-3 times. If you send it out once and you only get a couple, remember, these are parents running the busiest time of their lives, and they're getting tons of communications. So you may need to reach out to them 2, 3, 4 times in this step to get them to volunteer. And then the third ask is where you're going to reach out to them personally. So typically, if you've had the authority figure ask and you've done these first round of blasts to get everybody to volunteer, then what I like to do is go back to the people who haven't volunteered and ask them personally to volunteer. And I have a story about this. When I took over our booster club, I was a freshman parent coming in and was taking over as president. And I was working with some parents that were going to be senior parents that had been there for a few years. And when we were going through all the people in the program and who could lead what, someone told me not to ask Joe to volunteer, that he never volunteers. And in 3 years, he had never volunteered for anything. So I was at the next game and I happened to be sitting next to Joe in the stands. And I said, "Hey, Joe," I said, "would you be interested in doing some volunteering for the Booster Club this year? We've got a changing set of parents. We really need a lot of help." And he said immediately right back to me, "Absolutely. I'd love to lead our season kickoff dinner." And I thought it was so funny because the impression from all the other boosters was that Joe didn't volunteer at all. But I think a couple things had happened. One, he hadn't been personally asked. And two, the previous boosters had kind of had a group of them that worked together, and they weren't always necessarily friendly or welcoming to outsiders. And Joe handled the season kickoff dinner, did a fantastic job. It was one of the best events we've ever had. And it came really from that personal ask. "Joe, would you help us out?" And most people, when you get to that level, they're willing to give a little time to help support their children in the activities that they're doing. And then the last part of iChat, it ends with a T, is the thank you. The way you get volunteers for next year is by really putting your current year volunteers on a pedestal, talking about how great they were, perhaps recognizing them in a ceremony at your banquet, giving them an appreciation pin, perhaps having an exclusive breakfast with coach for only people who have volunteered, or a program sneak peek for only those who have volunteered. Yes, we're willing to use tactics to get volunteers here, but always give thanks for people's work. And sometimes that's really hard when you're on the Booster Club board and you are probably doing more work than anyone and probably getting, quite honestly, thanked the least. People really appreciate that show of gratitude and that thank you. And so if you can build that in, and maybe even a couple of thank you events during the season, that's a really great way to get people excited about volunteering for next year. So we're always building that volunteer pipeline. One of the things that you'll notice is this iChat system: introduction, contact, hype, ask, thank you. It really follows the marketing rule of 7. Really, that's all we're doing here. We're showing it to people, letting them get familiar with it, building some sales pitch around it with the hype. Then we're going to ask a couple of times, and then we're going to thank them. You're really doing those 7 points of contact to get the person to buy a volunteer slot, right? That's really what you're doing here. So it's really just follows best practices on how to get people to do something that you want them to do, whether it's buy something or get involved or volunteer. And so it's not coincidence that iChat follows those same principles. A few more tips and tricks outside of this that may be helpful is document roles and responsibilities for the club and include things like about how much time it's going to take, and perhaps this role is busy during these times of the year and this role is busy during other times of the year, and then post that publicly. So sometimes people are afraid to ask. They're afraid, oh my gosh, if I get involved, they're going to ask so much of me. But if you post something like on your website, here's the open positions, here's what's involved in that position, skills needed, and how much time it takes, then it reduces a barrier for people to come in and participate. And there are a lot of roles that are very active pre-season that don't have a lot of work once season starts. And then even vice versa. If you just do the banquet, then you're usually working on just end of season and you're not really busy during the season. And if you outline the roles and really break down and delegate the work into roles, that's really helpful too. Then it gives people a very clear picture of what their responsibility will be, and it encourages them to actively participate. Something like picking up one slot at a concession stand, obviously that's very black and white and tells them exactly what they're going to do. So this is really helpful more if you're trying to get them involved in the board work or things like that. Another thing is when you're that 20% and you're spending a lot of time doing the work of the Booster Club, you tend to make really good friends. And then at your events, you tend to hang out with your really good friends because the 20% of you are there doing all the work. And that's great. And that's what you should do. That's the great benefit of doing this work. One of the downfalls of that is sometimes as an outsider, it's intimidating from that group that hangs together and you kind of know them. They're the booster group. They're doing the work, but you're a little intimidated because you're not really friends with those people and you're not sure that they would want you around. So always be cognizant of the perception of your 20% group out there working. And ideally at big public events, don't work in your group, break up into individuals. And again, those name tags and shirts really help people feel like you're approachable and feel like they can come up to you and ask questions. So many people think, oh, but we're always there. They can always come talk to us. But sometimes we're closed off in our group talking together, getting the work done, but it makes it closed off so that outsiders aren't necessarily feeling that warm, welcoming feeling to come join us. The other thing to be very cautious about in a booster club is what I call Debbie Do Everything. So Debbie Do Everything is this great super booster volunteer who does everything in the booster club. Amazing, gets a ton of work done and really does it single-handedly. The problem is when you have a super volunteer, they tend not to delegate. They tend not to create roles and responsibilities for others to participate. And then what happens is your pipeline of volunteers and potential board members, all of that dries up because no one needs to do it because Debbie's got it covered and she's great and we love her and we couldn't do booster work without her, but it impacts your future potential for volunteers. And so sometimes if you have that situation, you may need to actually sit down and address it and say, hey, you are doing a fantastic job, but we have got to break this down into smaller roles because you can't do this forever and we have to replace you. And so I think that that's really important to recognize the role that they've played, recognize their good work, and then start to break those roles down. And if you are Debbie Do Everything because you feel like I can't get anyone else to do it, these are some of the tips and tricks that will help you get other people involved. And sometimes you have to let things fall through the cracks so people see, oh my gosh, we really do need more booster volunteers. Debbie really can't get it all done. So sometimes you need to let that plate fall so that then it kind of shows, okay, we need to build some depth in our booster club volunteers and our board members. And then one of the last techniques that I think is really powerful is when you build a culture around 100% participation in your booster club. This is a great technique where you encourage all of your families or all of your booster club members to volunteer for at least one thing throughout the season. And you track this publicly so you can see if you get to the first week of your event and you've got your volunteer signups and you get 50% of the families signed up, you can celebrate this and say, hey, we have 50% of our families are already signed up for volunteer slots. And as you move through the season, you'll just push this further on. And as you get to 75%, 80%, and it is really challenging to get to 100%. But if you make it a goal and you put it out there publicly and you talk about it a lot, then those 10% of families who aren't participating start to see it and think, oh my goodness, I need to sign up for something because we don't want to be that 5% or 10% that has not participated. And a really healthy booster club, one that's going to have longevity and is going to stick around for a long time and is going to be able to accomplish all the things that it needs to do to support the students' programs, is going to be really close to 100% participation because it really takes a group to make this happen, whether you're a sports team or a marching band program. So think about establishing a culture of 100% participation and then deploying that strategy with lots of visual communications to let people know, thanking people, and also recognize this doesn't happen overnight. So if I were starting, we're in July and we're looking towards, our season, my goal would be, let's implement iChat. Let's do 100% participation strategy. And then let's see how we do this season. If we had 30% of our families volunteer last year? Did we grow? Did we get to 50%? Did we get to 70%? That's awesome. And then the last thing is when you do those roles and responsibilities, make sure you do some things that people can do from home or on a weekend or late at night, because we do have some people who just don't have time in their day to fit in to come and do in-person volunteering, but we want to make sure that they have some opportunity to participate as well. I think you'll find if you implement iChat and 100% participation goal, you'll find that the ball does move on your number of volunteers and percentage of your community that participates. And we'd love to hear from you. Try this out over the next few months and then let us know. Did you see change? Did you see more people volunteer? And how did that impact your results? As always, here at the Boosted Volunteer, we love to cover topics that our boosters are facing on a daily basis and how we can help. And we hope that y'all have a wonderful fall season. We're excited for it. We've got a lot of great things coming from Booster Hub this year to help reduce the amount of time that it takes to manage your booster club and be out there more on the sidelines, being your students' number one fan. Have a great week, boosters.
The Boosted Volunteer is brought to you by Booster Hub. To find out more about Booster Hub and how our app can help you improve communications, increase engagement, raise more money, and manage your booster club responsibly, visit www.boosterhub.com. And then make sure to search for Booster Club Podcast in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Booster Hub, thanks for listening.